Tonight on the Late Debate, a deal done, now the Commons must decide. But Boris Johnson's Brexit victory is already in trouble, with both the DUP and Labour saying they won't vote for it. We're joined by London MPs from across the House to assess the PM's chances. Plus, Extinction Rebellion takes to the tube, but have the protests gone too far?
I strongly condemn the Extinction Rebellion protesters who have targeted the London Underground and DLR this morning. This illegal action is extremely dangerous.
Good evening. So, can Boris Johnson succeed where Theresa May failed? The Prime Minister's in Brussels tonight with what so many thought he would never get, a new deal to leave the European Union. But it's the same old problems. The DUP, Labour and even some in his own party stand in his way. So how does he persuade MPs to back his Brexit deal? For once, Westminster wasn't where it was happening. As the Prime Minister headed for Brussels, EU officials were already in front of the cameras.
Discussions over the past days have at times been difficult, but we have delivered, and we have delivered together.
We have a deal.
But the deal isn't a deal until MPs say so.
I hope very much now, speaking of elected representatives, that my fellow MPs in Westminster do now come together to get Brexit done, to get this excellent deal over the line.
The Labour leader immediately dismissed the new deal as worse than Theresa May's.
We believe the deal he's proposed is heading Britain in the direction of a deregulated society with a sell-off of national assets to American corporations. So, as it stands, we cannot support this deal and will oppose it in Parliament on Saturday.
What we're saying is that we think that MPs should back this compromise deal in order to bring an end to this level of uncertainty and get on with negotiating the actual ongoing relationship that we want to have with the European Union. So that's what we're urging MPs to do, is to get behind the deal.
Boris Johnson and Jean-Claude Juncker looked suitably chuffed with themselves, but Britain's Brexit torture isn't over yet. Joining me to discuss that are the Labour MP for Hornsey and Wood Green, Catherine West, Conservative Party Deputy Chair and Sutton and Cheam MP Paul Scully, and for the Liberal Democrats, the Streatham MP Chuka Umunna. Chuka, first of all, can Brexit be stopped?
I still think we have a good chance of stopping Brexit. It would be it would be undemocratic to proceed with this agreement. And let's take a step back. This is not a deal. This will deal with citizens' rights, a divorce bill and Northern Ireland. And some would question whether the Irish border on the island of Ireland has actually been resolved. But it is not a trade deal. If this is agreed, then there will be years more negotiation of a free trade deal. And what we know...
But don't we accept that as given, that there's going to be further negotiations for the moment?
Well,
can this deal get through Parliament on Saturday?
I don't think the numbers are there, and the DUP have indicated they're not going to support it. So I think it's quite unlikely that it will get through. And frankly, it shouldn't go through because it's a bad deal for Britain. Full stop. It should actually be referred back to the people.
Well, some of your colleagues will back it.
I don't know, but in terms of workers' rights, which is what the Labour movement is all about, maternity leave, paternity leave, holidays. I mean, in the US, it's quite usual in a job to have 10 days holiday a year. Here, we get 4 to 6 weeks. That's the sort of question, that's the society that we're leading towards.
Is that right, Paul, that this bill is going to lead to 10 days holiday a year?
Not in the slightest. Not in the slightest. There is no appetite in Parliament from any of the parties to start weakening workers' rights in the way that the Labour Party have started suggesting. And this is not, you know, as Chuka says, the one thing I agree with Chuka about, this isn't the end deal. This is to get us to the next stage, to talk about the future relationship. All it's doing is working out how we leave the EU. All of the things, whether it's workers' rights, whether it's future trade deals and these kind of things, are all up for discussion in the future.
So what's going to happen on Saturday?
What's going to happen on Saturday? Well, I hope that actually people put their narrow party views aside and do what's best for the country. I suspect if it was a secret ballot, it would sail through. But clearly it's not, because you've got so many different factions looking at their own self-interest.
Hang I just admit, let's just look at the government's own research on what has been proposed in the political declaration, and granted it's not legally binding, which is to leave the single market and leave the customs union. And according to your government's own research, we are looking at a fall in real wages of at least 6%, a fall of GDP of at least 6%, on your government's own research on its deal. I don't know who voted to be poorer as a result of this Brexit mess.
Actually, frankly, I could point you to a whole lot of people that vote themselves poorer. People do this all the time.
People voted to be poorer.
Look, you don't work 7 days a week. People don't work 7 days a week because they choose to have a weekend, because they want to spend time with their families. People make decisions about the politics and the sovereignty all the time. This is not solely an economic decision that voted to leave, but essentially what we're finding now is on Saturday we can start to look for the trade deals, not just with the EU, but with around the world, rather than actually going through what you're suggesting now and reheating the whole referendum argument that was settled 3 years ago.
But you said there were going to be years and years more negotiation to come.
I didn't say there was going to be years. No, you said that. What I said, there are
you just said there's going to be lots of time, years to negotiate.
OK, well, if you can't agree what each of you said, Catherine, can I just ask you, what do you think is going to happen on Saturday?
It's really simple. The Tories have had 3.5 years on their favourite topic, which is Brexit. It's a psychodrama for the family of Tory MPs in Parliament. And now it's the time to stop the deal, vote against it and have a second referendum. That's all there is to it.
Help me here. Does Labour want to stop Brexit or proceed with it?
We are really worried about the workers' rights deregulation, because this is opening the door.
It's not quite an answer. Where do you stand on Brexit?
I will want to stop Brexit. I think it's a nightmare.
But as a party?
And I think we've stopped talking about the NHS, we've stopped talking about the lack of childcare, we've stopped talking about the fact that disabled children, this government would rather introduce an expensive customs computer than pay for disabled children to have teachers in their schools to look after them.
This is just not right, because the Lib Dems at least are being honest, although they keep talking about people's vote. They are honest that they want to stop Brexit. Catherine is talking about the workers' rights and these things in the future. If you're confident that you're going to win a general election because you've got people on your side, have a general election, and then it'll be Jeremy Corbyn that's deciding that future relationship, which includes workers' rights. You're obviously thinking that Boris is going to be there for years to come.
If you win a general election, you can dictate the terms of the future agreement.
Well, the thing is that the EU provides us with a floor, so it's a floor on workers' rights. Then what we can do as the Labour Party is add to those rights. The trouble with leaving the European Union is that you're taking away the floor. So you would have to start, if we had 10 years of a Tory government, we'd be starting down here in order to even get back to where we are now.
So you're expecting 10 years of
a Tory
government?
The problem is, I mean, I don't disagree with Catherine on, the merits of EU membership, but the problem is the Labour Party had the opportunity at its conference to unequivocally back remaining in the European Union, and it shied away from doing that because Jeremy Corbyn wants to negotiate a Labour Brexit. And in that sense, Paul is right. I mean, with the Liberal Democrats, we are absolutely clear we need to stop Brexit. I mean, ultimately, if we want to focus on the big issues the country's facing, you've got to stop the chaos and the mess. Now, we're saying stop Brexit, and admittedly, really, the Tories are saying just get, just do any kind of Brexit.
You've spent the last 3 years campaigning for a second referendum, a people's vote. You've now switched to the Lib Dems, where you've pledged to revoke Article 50 without a referendum. Are you personally comfortable with that?
I'm fine with that, because the principle is the same. Stop Brexit through a democratic mandate. And pending there being a general election, and we're co-founders, I'm personally a co-founder of the People's Vote campaign, our argument is to have a people's vote with Remain on the ballot, and unlike the Labour Party, we're clear we will be campaigning to remain in the European Union. However, if we don't have a people's vote by the time of a general election, and you have a Liberal Democrat government which has put in its manifesto that it wants to stop Brexit, I think that people would find it rather odd if we had a majority to be able to stop Brexit that we didn't do so. So the principle is stop Brexit through a democratic mandate.
Paul Scully, is there still a chance that there will be a second referendum?
I can't see it. I can't see it because there's no guarantee that would actually resolve anything, frankly. Because one thing, and you heard it from Jasmine Whitbread at the beginning of the show, that businesses are crying out for certainty. And the only way you're going to get certainty is to have a form of Brexit that businesses can then say, this is what we need to deal with. Until when things are up in the air, whether it's deal, whether it's no deal, whether it's revoke, and all these kind of things, businesses can't plan. They need to be able to plan, and that's what attracts investment, and that's the certainty that would just be kicked into the long grass if we had months and months again.
There's no certainty. Nobody knows what's going to happen at the end of the transition period next year. You don't know what the trade deal is going to be.
They will know what basis they're trading on over the next few months when investment is being stalled.
So you think a trade deal is going to be done in the next year?
No. What I'm saying is investment. So people are waiting to make investment decisions now, and they want to be able to make it now for the next few years. And so we can gradually transition towards a long-term future relationship.
Catherine, do you think that this deal is likely to end up in the courts?
It could well end up in the courts. That's why we have to, this weekend, we have to put a stop to Brexit and we have to give it back to the people and say, do you want really to go ahead with Brexit? Because 3.5 years ago, people didn't know what they know now. They didn't know about the workers' rights and the fact that it could open the door to deregulation. It could open the door to the privatisation of the NHS through a US trade deal. They didn't realise that this was just one step. It will be 7 years more of this, plus with the US 10 years, 10 to 15 years. I mean, do we really want to be spending all of our time doing that?
Saturday, has he shot your fox, or rather shot Jeremy Corbyn's fox?
Well, if he pulls it off, he pulls it off. But my view is that I believe that we still have a lot of people who would like to see this revisited themselves and have their own voice. Because in the end, we know so much more and people would have an informed choice in another referendum. And none of us really want to go through it, but we also know that this could be the only way of unlocking what's happened in Parliament, which is a deadlock, often in votes. We don't know, but we could be sitting here on Saturday evening. It hasn't gone through, and so it's obvious to me that therefore we do need to have that second referendum and put it back to the people to give them the chance to decide.
Can we just stop talking about Brexit for a moment? Because I'm sure a lot of people have had enough of Brexit, and to one other subject which has been occupying the minds of a lot of Londoners this week. Because for nearly 2 weeks, the group Extinction Rebellion has been trying to bring London to a standstill. The climate change protests have seen roads blocked, offices blockaded, and today the activists went one step further, targeting the Underground. But it didn't go as planned. This was the moment commuters fought back. After days of disruption, Extinction Rebellion chose the wrong target, an early morning tube train at Canning Town in East London. Passengers trying to get to work were furious and took their own direct action. The Mayor condemned Extinction Rebellion's tactics.
This illegal action is extremely dangerous, counterproductive, and is causing unacceptable disruption to Londoners and visitors who use public transport to get to work.
But the Mayor has faced criticism for his handling of the protests.
They're causing mayhem on the streets. And the only time you start to say, oh, well, I'm going to get tougher on this, is when they're on one of your trains. The fact is, the public took things into their own hands today and pulled somebody off the top of a train.
Millions of pounds has been spent trying to minimise the disruption caused by the so-called autumn uprising. The Met drafted in reinforcements from across the UK. This was the convoy of police vans leaving Scotland for London. The bright lights beckoned, along with basic food rations and long hours.
They're working 16, 17-hour shifts down here. In the worst case I had from the team that have recently returned to Essex, finished at 2 in the morning and had to be back out at 6 the next day. So long shifts, a long time to be on your feet.
9 days into the protest, Scotland Yard decided to play hardball. The activists were threatened with prosecution if they refused to move on. Senior officers gave the impression the Mayor and his advisers were in on the decision.
We have discussed the policing operation throughout and we will continue to do so.
And would the Mayor have been aware of this before it happened?
We've discussed the policing operation throughout and we will continue to do so.
But that wasn't the view from City Hall.
I wasn't consulted. Nobody spoke to me about it. I'm also quite clear. I've been reassured by the police. There is no blanket ban in our city.
Extinction Rebellion, meanwhile, is now reflecting on whether it went too far. The protest movement is said to be taking stock. Still here to discuss that are Labour's Catherine West, Conservative Paul Scully and Liberal Democrat Chuka Umunna. Chuka, first of all, what do you make of the Mayor's handling of the police operation and the police tactics?
To be frank, I'm more interested in the bigger issue. You can talk about what Mayor Carr knew and what he didn't know. The overall goal is to put pressure on the government to take action on the climate emergency. And the real question here is what Extinction Rebellion is doing helping that or actually holding it back? Now, it's definitely raising the issue. That is a good thing. it seems rather counterproductive to stop people getting public transport, because surely we would rather they be on public transport than in cars which cough out God knows how much pollution and emissions. And ultimately, is this going to bring people to the environmental cause who weren't there before? And as you could see, I don't think there's any excuse for the violence either way, frankly, and if what we saw there were passengers beating up the Extinction Rebellion protesters, obviously that is wrong, but it does illustrate that that kind of action for people who are just trying to go about and do their daily, work and get on with their lives is not bringing people to the cause. So I think they should think again in that respect about the taxes. They have been protesting around here at Westminster, and it hasn't caused anything like the same inconvenience to people, and actually it's kind of brought it very much to the forefront of MPs' minds, which I don't think is a bad thing. But that kind of action I don't think works and gets us to reducing climate emissions, reducing pollution, making sure our air is cleaner.
Catherine, do you think Extinction Rebellion's misjudged it?
I think some of the tactics are a bit, as my daughter would say, too much, or whatever their children say these days, but because they're really involved in it as well. It's really kind of captured the imagination of young people, and so we don't want to lose the fact that people are very excited about this green agenda and the Greta Thunberg and all the rest of it. And we do have to remember that thousands of people are dying in London because of the air pollution. So I think that we do have to make difficult decisions, but I would admit that some of those tactics, certainly the footage that you've had on tonight, is a bit over the top, a bit ultra.
Have the mayor and the police caused confusion by not being clear on whether they should allow these protests and allow the disruption?
I think what's taken people by surprise is the length of them, because over the summer everyone thought this will be a holiday thing. There were the school strikes, but it's going on, and I think that does reflect...
So should the police have moved in earlier? Well,
I think perhaps we should have been more prepared, or maybe shared a bit more information. I mean, let's try and have a dialogue with these people and say, what do you want? What are your aims, and so on. But I also would say that whereas in the Queen's speech I don't think normally climate change would have even got in there, Mr Johnson did actually put one sentence in about climate change, which is quite a big concession from this government. So maybe some of it in the big picture is working.
So what do you admire about the Extinction Rebellion protests this week?
Well, as Chuka said, it is raising the issue. Actually, to be fair, raising the profile of the concern is really, really important. I think they did go too far because you've got to take people with you. With all the whole environmental agenda, the whole climate agenda, you do need to work out, rather than just trying to overthrow capitalism in this kind of extreme way, working out how to nudge people, how to change people's behaviour, how to use technology, how to use legislation far better to affect that sort of change over a period of time. But you've seen the mayor who basically gave the green light to the protesters when he was sort of undermining the police efforts one day, but then was having to rail back when he saw the effect on public transport this morning. We even had people gluing themselves to an electric train, which again is slightly defying the logic of trying to get people onto...
Can I put this tweet to you from one of your fellow MPs on the Conservative benches, Tobias Ellwood, former Defence Minister? Well done to the general public for swiftly standing as one, stepping forward and closing the incident down when individuals break the law. Do you agree?
Yeah, in terms of that, I don't condone violence. So I don't condone, we've seen some of the footage, so I don't know what happened after that. But I would hope the police would be there to move in. But in terms of actually trying to clear the trains for millions of people that move around London each day, these tube trains move on a very, very fine timing.
Do you think enough is enough now?
I think the point's been made, but the real question is how to actually get change. And, I think as Catherine said, it's good it was in the Queen's speech, but look, if we're going to be in a general election, this is a time to keep raising the issue. But, just, for goodness sake, just do it in the right way, because this is repelling people. And the better our transport system works, the more people are going to get out of their cars and use it. Why stand in the way of that? It's just completely counterproductive in my view.
Chuka, you mentioned a general election. Catherine, can I ask you, in the light of what happened with Brexit today, do you think a general election is now much closer? Do you think Jeremy Corbyn's going to finally agree?
I mean, the thing is, I'm ready for it, so I've been planning for this. It was funny because this time a year ago we thought there might have been an election, so we've all sort of been election ready, and I think the window does feel as though it's closing on this mandate. I think people are a bit sick of this Parliament, and it might be good to throw the cards in the air and have another vote and see how we end up with that.
And Chuka, you of course are trying to take the seat of City and Westminster, Tory majority at the moment. If we've left the EU by the time of the general election, what does that do to your chances?
I don't think London is ready to give up the fight for us to have the closest possible relationship with the European Union. As it happens, I don't think that this deal is going to go through. As things stand, as we're speaking this evening, there are not the numbers. I don't see that changing on Saturday. But I do think that this is going to take us probably on a trajectory towards a general election if there is not a people's vote. It will be a Remain-Leave election. It won't only be about those things, but I figure that the Prime Minister will go to the people for a mandate to pursue his hard Brexit.
And if we've left, what do the Lib Dems do then?
Well, look, we will want to ensure that we have the closest possible relationship going forward.
Campaign to rejoin the EU?
I will always want us to rejoin the European Union, but the fight's not lost, and we've still got a long way to go in all of this. And in some way, shape or form, I think Catherine's right, it's got to go back to the people, whether it's a general election or referendum. And, you know, the cities of London, Westminster is a constituency that voted 73% to remain in the European Union, and it's represented by a party that wants to drag it out of the European Union.
Paul, I'm sure you'd say general election, bring it on, but you must have seen that opinion poll carried out by the Lib Dems in Finchley and Golders Green, one of your seats.
With a relatively small sample.
400 people. It still showed a huge swing to the Lib Dems. You must be worried about some seats, Remain seats in London.
Well, I think, you know, we've got to look at the whole picture, and a lot of the polls at the moment are up in the air because, again, people are uncertain. They don't really know what's going on. Catherine talked about the fact that people are sick of this Parliament. Frankly, I'm sick of this Parliament. I sit there...
Present company excluded.
Well, no, I mean that as an overall body, because, you know, you have the likes of the leader of the Lib Dems who's saying actually she wants a people's vote, but then she's happy to not respect the result of that if it doesn't go the right way. You've got Jeremy Corbyn who sits there and says, I'm going to negotiate my own deal and then I'm going to campaign against it in a referendum because I want to remain. It's hardly surprising, frankly, that people are looking in Parliament, scratching their head and thinking, what on earth is going on?
You've got a Prime Minister that kicked off this mess in the first place by promising a fantasy Brexit that Parliament can't deliver.
We've got a Prime Minister that's actually done what people said he couldn't do and get the withdrawal agreement opened, got a deal from the EU, which against all odds, and now it's up to Parliament again, that crazy body, to actually do what's right for the country.
Just before we close, because we're running out of time, very quickly, between the three of you, what do you think is going to come first, a second referendum or a general election?
What I'd like to come first is the second referendum to deal with Brexit once and for all.
General election, we need it for domestic agenda as well.
I'd like to see a people's vote, that's the primary thing, but I think a general election is looking more likely.
Chuka, Paul, Catherine, thank you very much indeed for coming in and talking to us this evening. And that is the end of tonight's programme. I'll be back next month when we may or may not have left the European Union, but we will definitely have a new speaker here in Westminster. Until then, good night and thank you for watching.